Państwa, witamy serdecznie na spotkaniu z autorką ulubionych moich kryminałów. Mam nadzieję, że też Państwa. Proszę Państwa, taki piękny stos już tutaj tych książek dla Państwa przygotowaliśmy. To jest cały cykl szetlandzki. Ja dzisiaj będę rozmawiała z Ann Cleeves o tym cyklu, ale nie tylko, to już będzie niespodzianka. Spotkanie w języku angielskim, ale za chwilę pojawią się napisy. Zapraszamy. Okay, Anne, lovely to meet you. Thank you again for agreeing to talk to me and to broadcast that to our readers.
Oh, it's been lovely to meet you. So yes, I'm looking forward to chatting.
Great, thank you so much. I just presented the whole pile of books that are part of your Shetland series. And actually, this is the first question I wanted to ask you. When you started writing this series, have you ever imagined it's going to grow that big?
No, the first book was going to be a standalone novel. My editor said it would stretch credibility too far to have more than one murder on such a small group of islands, because there are only 23,000 people live in all the different Shetland Islands. So it was going to be one book. But then it sold more books than anything else I'd written. And suddenly she said, well, maybe it would run to a small series. So I did a quartet, 4 books at first. And then I still had things I wanted to say about Shetland. So now there are 8 books, but that's it. No more than 8.
Are you sure? Are you sure that there is no other
there might be some short stories, but the TV show, I don't know if you see the TV show in Poland, but that will continue. And they were ready to start filming last spring, but then of course with COVID everything shut down and they were sent home, but they'll start filming again in February.
I'm not sure if Polish readers or Polish viewers were able to watch it, but I'm sure some of them managed to, because everything is available online usually.
Yes.
But
through Netflix or BritBox or something. Yeah.
Exactly. Are you participating in screenwriting for the series as well?
No, I don't write the scripts either for Vera or for Shetland. I meet the script writers. They know that I'm here if they want to talk to me, but I've really enjoyed writing the books. The prose is what I love writing. And I think they should have the chance to have the freedom to write the script that they want to write without me interfering and meddling and saying, no, you can't do that.
But are you watching them?
I do. I watch them, and sometimes I get sent the DVDs in advance, but really I just like watching them with everybody else. So Vera's on a Sunday night and I'll sit and watch that, or Shetland on a Tuesday usually. So yeah, no, I love watching them.
Are you ever surprised by whatever twists the script writers manage to create?
Yeah, sometimes they change the killers or they add characters or cut characters out, but that's fine. I think what they do beautifully, and if your readers can get to see them, I do advise that they try, because they do capture very much the essence of the book, the atmosphere, and the characters are really strong too. So yes, I think I've been very, very lucky. It's the same production team make both series.
I wanted to ask about this atmosphere and the setting, because the island setting is quite unusual. Do you have any ideas what makes it so special? What is it with these close-knit communities that they make for such an atmospheric setting for crime novels?
I think they're very traditional, aren't they? That idea of an enclosed community is very much, we call it the golden age of crime fiction, that period between the wars when people like Agatha Christie, Dorothy Sayers were writing fiction. And I think that certainly for British readers, there's that affection for that very traditional format. But I like to bring it up to date and bring a contemporary twist to it. So Shetland it's a very interesting community. It's on the same line of latitude as bits of Alaska and Greenland. So it's a long way north. It's 13 hours by ferry from Aberdeen up to Shetland. So it's a long way north. And so it is very different. It feels very Scandinavian. So I think even British people who weren't aware quite where the Shetland Islands were have become quite intrigued. And it's where all all our North Sea oil came ashore. So this was a community that was very basic farming, fishing, quite had to struggle to make a living on the islands. And then suddenly along came the big oil companies who built their oil and suddenly everybody had lots of money because they were driving the oil executives around and got jobs in the accommodation block or the oil terminal. And so the whole nature of Shetland changed at that point. So it made it a very, very interesting place to write about. And now the oil's run out, it's all gone. So again, Shetlanders are having to adapt to a different way of life. And partly that's about tourism. And again, that's not happened now because of COVID. But tourism went up something like 43% as a result of the books and the TV show. So that brought something a bit different, a new economic vibrancy to the islands when they needed it most.
Everything you're saying makes me think that it's not that surprising that so many crimes could have taken place, because all these changes in real life, they also kind of somehow facilitate that.
I think so. And there certainly have been a couple of murders in Shetland. You know, you get a lot of young men on their own together in accommodation blocks, and drink becomes a problem and drugs can become a problem. And there are very long nights there. It gets very dark very early in the winter because it's so far north. And again, that can cause depression and possibility of domestic abuse, perhaps. So they're very different to the crimes in my books, perhaps, but there are real crimes there too.
That's for sure.
Though not very many. It's a very law-abiding and very safe place to live.
But you wouldn't say that there is a space for one crime only and that's it, right? How come you happened to be writing about the Shetlands? Because from what I know, you don't live there, you've never lived there. So why Shetland?
I did live there for a little while. Okay. I dropped out of university when I was a student. I left. I didn't particularly enjoy university. And just by chance, I got offered a job to be an assistant cook in the bird observatory in Fair Isle, which is the most remote of the Shetland Islands. And I thought it would be an adventure. I was 20, I think, and it would be fun and it would be different. So off I went to be assistant cook in the bird observatory, knowing nothing about birds and not being able to cook. But
was it an adventure?
It was an adventure. I loved it. I was very seasick. I got there. There's the 13-hour ferry up from Aberdeen up to Shetland mainland, and then another boat, the mail boat, which is called the Good Shepherd, from Shetland mainland into Fair Isle, and it's horrible. It's the worst sea crossing you can imagine. I was so ill, so arrived very seasick, but as soon as I came round and felt a bit better, I loved the island. It's very small, only 3 miles long and 1.5 miles wide, but with about 50 people living there, but so many great stories.
Sounds like a dream place for a writer, doesn't it?
Well, I wasn't writing them, but I was certainly a reader, and my parents sent me in packages of books. So I did read a lot while I was there and listened a lot. So got invited into other people's houses for lunch and coffee on my days off, and would just listen to people telling stories. And a lot of those have fed into the Shetland novels.
Oh. So that was your first encounter, but do you return to the islands? How do you do your research? You have to go and check things.
Yeah, I go partly again just to listen, so to sit in cafes and listen to people talking, because I don't write in dialect, but I try to get the rhythm of the speech to give a flavour of Shetland. And yes, I've got friends there. I go back. Again, I was supposed to be there a couple of times this year, once in June and once in September, but I couldn't get there. But I have great friends there, and I go and stay and catch up with friends. And if whenever I was launching a Shetland book, I would also always launch it in Shetland through Shetland libraries. So, yes.
Are they well received in the Shetlands?
Yes, I think so. I mean, people will always find some mistake that I've made, but I think they have fun looking for the mistake, so that's fine. And as I say, it's brought work and tourism to the islands when it's most needed as the oil's running out. So that's good too.
Yes, that's a good influence. I feel when I'm reading your books, I always feel that the setting, the islands in the case of these series, that this is like a separate character, that this is the real hero of the story. I wanted to ask you how do you do that actually? Because your characters, they seem somehow to grow out of these island setting. Yeah. And they wouldn't be who they are had they lived somewhere else. I can't imagine Jimmy Perez living in, I don't know, the Cotswolds or Hampshire.
No, I think so. And I think my youngest daughter is an academic, and she's a human geographer. And what her research is looking at the individual within their community. And I think we are a product of the places where we grew up, you know, the streets where we played, the people that we played with, the schools that we went to, what we see out of our windows. Mm-hmm. And in Shetland, you see sea mostly. You're never more than a couple of miles from the sea. No trees, very long horizons. And I love writing about that contrast between a very open landscapes and then secrets that might be hidden. I think that's interesting to write about.
Can you imagine writing a book which is not set somewhere that you lived?
No, I would need to know it very well. So I've got 3 main series now. So there's the Shetland series, the Vera series, which is set in Northumberland, which is where I live, and then quite a new series set in North Devon. And I lived there too. I was brought up in North Devon and was there until I was an adult. So I had all my teenage years in North Devon. So that was fun going back and researching that and catching up with other friends there too.
I can imagine that. So perhaps the question should rather be phrased. Do you ever feel tempted to set a series in some new location so that you have an excuse
to I can go and visit
for a while?
Yes, somewhere like the south of France or the Seychelles would be quite nice. Have a tax-deductible 6 months on holiday. No, I need to live there and feel very much a part of the place.
Okay, so that's about the setting. What about the plot? This is one of the questions that appear in a few readers' comments that they wanted to ask. First of all, do you know who the murderer is when you begin to write? How do you plot them?
No, I don't even know who the victim is when I begin to write. So I write like a reader. So I'll write the first scene and then I need to know what's going to happen next. So I'll write the next scene. And that's how it works. And about halfway through, I've got some sort of idea where I'm going. But no, it's definitely not plotted in advance.
So do you ever feel lost, like in the middle, if you don't?
Quite often feel lost in the middle, yes. That's the most tricky time when you're in the middle and you feel as if you're wading around in blancmange a bit, but you know, that you're in custard, you can't feel where you're going. It's a bit of a fog. But you have to realize that for 20 years of writing, I had a mainstream publisher, but I didn't have very much commercial success. So it had to be fun. You know, if you're going to write it, it's got to be fun because I was making no money. So, and I couldn't see how it would be fun if you knew how the book was going to end. You might not, it's like reading the end of a book before you start it. You know, if you know how it's going to end, you somehow lose that mystery and that sense of excitement in the writing of it. So
it's really interesting what you're saying, because there are so many writers who have it all planned with all the post-it notes all over the walls, and still they manage to write.
Yeah, different people work in very different ways, and I mean, for any aspiring writers who are listening, you just have to find your own way of doing it and find out what works best for you, and then that's how it works.
So have you ever been, like yourself, have you ever been surprised by the ending of your own book?
No, because I'm still in charge.
Okay.
So I decide what happens at the end. If there are different paths to take, I'll decide which one to take. And by the time I get to the end, I do have a very clear idea. Sometimes I might change my mind right at the end and it doesn't quite work out. Or sometimes I'll get to the end and think, oh, of course, that's what it's about. That was what it was always about. So a kind of theme or an emotion or something cohesive that I suddenly realize will work to hold the story together. That can be a lovely surprise at the end.
You have to rewrite parts of the book then.
Yes, yes. I know that a first draft is going to need rewriting because I'll need to go back and change bits, but not as much as you would think. I think that it is fairly linear. It does work out okay. I've done it this way for so long, for 30 books, that I'm a bit old to be changing now, I think.
I've attempted to change. I mean, to try something new, like, I don't know, try writing short stories or not. Short stories, you said that maybe they would appear in the Shetland series. But something
yes, I do write short stories, and there is one collection called Offshore, which is about different island communities where I've lived and worked. So that was quite fun to do. And I probably write 2 or 3 short stories a year. And that I can set in somewhere where I've never lived. And because if you go somewhere new, I think you get that first excitement and that first impact that a place can give you when you're new to it. You know, you see things that you don't see when they're more familiar. And that's great for a short story, because a short story is one moment in time quite often. And that first excitement is, you can capture that in a short story. So I've written short stories I've done a couple set in Tanzania and one in Finland and one in Alaska. So I've set short stories. I don't send postcards, but I'll quite often write short stories triggered by the places that I'm visiting.
So you say you write like 2 or 3 short stories per year. How long do you work on the novel?
Novel takes about 9 months. It's like a baby. Yeah, that's the time that it takes to grow.
Do you prefer one of these?
I think a novel is easier because I think so. Short story, every word has to count because it's so tight. So every word has to matter in a way that with a novel, it's not quite so important, I think.
Okay, can you, because you said, and I think that most readers do realize that you've been working as a writer for many years. Can you tell us how it came to be? What was your path towards crime writing?
I was always a reader, so I always read and read and read. And when I was at school, I would write, short stories or little pieces, dreadful verse, wrote the worst poetry in the world, awful, awful stuff. And then when I was first married, I met my husband when I was working in Fair Isle in the island. And he came as a visiting bird watcher. And then he came back the next year when I was promoted to head cook the following year. So my cooking must have been okay. And then we got married soon after that. And he got a job as warden of this nature reserve, tiny tidal island nature reserve. And we were the only people living there. No mains water, no mains electricity. And that was a good place to write. So that was a place where I'm not particularly interested in natural history or birds, so there wasn't much else for me to do. So that was where I started writing.
Well, this is all bird spots, we might say.
Yeah, and you'll notice lots of references to birds in the book, because even though I'm not interested, they appeared over the years. They came into my psyche as a sort of osmosis. So.
It's really interesting, and it's kind of like a dream story, really. That you somehow get lost on a desert island, so you start writing, right?
Yeah, it wasn't quite that dreamy though, because the island was tidal. so that when the tide went out, people could walk over. And it was very close to the city of Liverpool, so very close to a big city with lots of people. And so in the summer, every weekend, we'd have hordes of people walking across the sand and looking over our wall into our garden and knocking on our door, wanting to use the toilet usually. So it was, it was a great contrast, because in the summer we were swarmed with people, and in the winter nobody much visited at all, except birdwatch.
It must have been tough though, with no electricity and all other amenities.
Yeah, the house was fairly well organized, so we did have colour gas and we had Tilly lamps, so we had a little generator that we could run if we needed to.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have a question about the character of these books, because there is this Jimmy Perez, and his name is definitely not Shetlandish.
No, it's Spanish.
Yeah, and I always wondered, why did you decide to put such a character with this outlandish name into this traditional island community?
I think because the first book, Raven Black, is about what it is to be an outsider. Sorry, I've got a tickle in my throat.
Sure.
Too much talking. Yeah, the first book is about what it is to be an outsider. And so I wanted a central character who belonged but also didn't quite belong. And there was an armada ship, a Spanish armada ship, wrecked off Fair Isle in the 16th century. So there would have been, and there was, I think, 60 survivors came off the wreck into the island. So it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that one of them might married an island woman, and so the name continued.
Wow, poor Spaniards. They must have been devastated when they realized how powerful they are.
I know, blown way off course.
Do you like Jimmy? Is he a character that you find, I don't know, somehow close? Not just because you wrote so many books, so you dedicated at least 8 years of your life to him, right? But somehow personally feel for him.
I think in the book I describe him as emotionally incontinent, meaning that he gives so much of himself to the witnesses and to his work. And I certainly wouldn't want to be married to him, because I think he would have no emotion or no warmth left.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's quite possible. So do you have any other character that you're particularly fond of?
Oh, I like them all, because I become them all when I'm writing them. So I get inside their heads and see the world through their eyes.
So has any of them been especially difficult to become?
No.
To get into the heads of some of them.
I think writing is very like acting. We become this person. We step inside their skin and we look at them in that way. So no, it's all a challenge to see the world through somebody else's point of view. And that's why fiction is so important, I think, because fiction makes us more sympathetic. It helps us to understand people whose views we might not otherwise want to listen to. That's why it makes us more tolerant.
Yeah, that's definitely.
We have to become somebody else when we're writing and when we're reading.
Yeah, no, I believe there is a difference between becoming someone else while reading and while writing, probably. Because while writing, is it so that this character stays with you also when you are not physically writing? Do you happen to, I don't know, wonder at some point of the day what would, I don't know, this or that character, what would Jimmy do at this moment or something?
Yeah, you sometimes do completely lose yourself. So become in that place and in that body and that mind, even if it's Jimmy Perez, who's a man who lives in Shetland and who is younger than me, and so you do lose yourself, you lose your personality a bit while you're writing. But then I come back to reality and I'm here in my own house.
And you get this
Northumberland
personality back.
Yes, I get myself back. But it's great fun because you travel and you meet other people while you're working.
Mm-hmm. Do you happen to dream about your characters?
I don't usually dream about them, but in that moment of waking, quite often that's when good ideas come.
Mm-hmm.
So I do wake up very early. I'm awake usually at 5 o'clock, and then I'm starting to write at 6. I'm much better. I work much better early in the morning. I'm not very good. I can't create so well in the afternoon and the evening. And again, everybody's different. Some writers are night owls and they want to be up writing in the middle of the night, but not me.
Do you write very regularly? Is it like every morning you wake up, you work for, I don't know, an hour or two?
Yeah, I do, because I love it though. And I've just finished a new book, and I'm kind of lost at the minute, especially with lockdown, because because I live in the north of England and we've had a spike of infections, so we're in quite strict lockdown again. So I can't go out with my friends, and I can't meet a friend for coffee, or I am allowed to see my children because I look after their children quite a lot. So I'm considered an essential worker in the fact that I look after their kids so they can go to work. But it's not quite the same as having that freedom to go out. So I'm lost. I want to be writing again. So I'm hoping my editors will get the feedback back quite soon, the edits back, so I can start working again.
So you just jump from one book to another as soon as you can?
I'll start thinking about a new book as soon as I finished another one. But in the past, I would be off on holiday or touring quite a lot, because I tour quite a lot to promote the book. So I would be in the States, or I would be in Iceland actually quite soon. But all that's been cancelled. So I'm feeling quite restless and quite itchy, and I will need to start thinking about a new book soon.
Actually, you practically answered one of the questions from the readers, which was whether pandemia somehow influenced the way you work right now.
Yeah, I'm not writing about it because I started this last book before the pandemic started, and I'm hoping that by the time it's published, things will be back to a new normal. We will have a vaccine and things will be a bit more normal, and maybe even people will be able to shake hands again. And so I haven't written about it. So it is set just a bit before the pandemic, this last one. But it's certainly made me more productive. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because I'm traveling in the books instead of traveling in reality. Right. But I did get to India just before we were all shut down, and I'm so glad I did that. I did a couple of book festivals in India. Wow. And I was supposed to be coming to Poland, wasn't I, in May? I was really looking forward to that too.
Yeah, we're so sorry about that. Yeah. Let's hope that maybe it's going to be possible pretty soon.
Yes, yeah, I hope so. All those festivals that have been put back.
Yeah, you were lucky with India though, because they locked down pretty fast. So I know of very many people who were having real troubles coming back.
Yeah, no, I was very lucky. I was there in January, so just before it all happened. And I had a wonderful time. It was my first time in the country, and I loved every minute of it.
So are you tempted to write a short story which would be set there?
Yeah, maybe set in Kolkata, which I loved. And I actually wrote a short piece for a small publisher that's based there. And that's gone into their catalogue. So I did write something for them.
Would you be tempted to write a crime novel which would somehow include the pandemics and everything that's happening right now?
I think it would have to be much further on, because things are moving so quickly. We thought in the summer that it was pretty well all finished, and that people were going back to normal, and we were meeting friends and family. Being a bit careful and being outside. And now suddenly, as was perhaps expected, we've had this second wave. And I think we know so little about it that it would be quite hard to write a contemporary novel around it. But in 5 years' time, where we understand it a bit more, then I think is the time to write it, perhaps. And I know people are are taking different approaches, and some people are writing that great lockdown novel, and other people like Val McDermott said, no, my next book is being set in 1979. That way I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, that's
taking different approaches.
Yeah, because on one hand, this is such an overwhelming experience that it's kind of easy to imagine writing about it and sharing. But then, yes, you're right, it should be further on, and should be.
I think so. Otherwise, it'll be because that it's at least a year between, well, 2 years between starting a book and it being published. In 2 years, things change so much.
And there would be plenty of books on that subject probably soon.
I think so. And don't you think that we want to be reading about something else? We've heard so much about the pandemic. We watch the news.
Yeah.
It's all we think about. That, and fiction is such a great escape, I think. And perhaps especially traditional detective fiction, because there is that sense at the end of a crime book of order restored and somehow things coming back to normal. And I think that's what we're all longing for at the moment, is that sense of, let's get everything back to normal and get rid of all this chaos. And I think that's very much the sense that you get when you're reading traditional crime fiction. That's what you're looking for.
Which is, on one hand, this is perfectly understandable, but then on the other, there is something strange in the fact that we take such comfort in reading about crimes and dark characters.
It is, isn't it? It's very weird. I think there is that, it's a way of coming to terms with the unexpected and the tense and the violent, perhaps, that if we read about it in fiction, though my books, the crime is really not at the heart of them, I think. The crime provides a framework, but really I don't write about monsters. I write about ordinary people who are pushed beyond endurance. So I think that the format of the crime novel works very well for me. It provides me with a plot, but in one sense it's very liberating because it allows me to explore those things that I find most interesting, which is about community and how we grow out of the place and the people where we grew up, but also about a lot about fractured families.
Would you say that your books are very British? Because that's what some readers say, that the Shetland series, apart from the setting, that there is some kind of Britishness, and the style is so different from Scandinavian crime or other national, let's say, literatures.
Yeah, I think so. I think I do. I don't mean to, but because of my reading, I write very much within that traditional British, that again, we call Golden Age crime fiction, which has a kind of structure, I think, that is recognizable, even though I'm writing about today and contemporary and subjects that are sometimes quite disturbing. But the structure is there and recognizably British, I think.
Do you have any writers that you feel you're following the footsteps of?
Quite a lot, yeah. And I think it's quite interesting that if we look back in time, the periods in history when this kind of crime fiction was most popular were times in history which were very disturbed and disturbing. So the Agatha Christie, Dorothy Sayers writing between the wars, so the 1930s here, which we sometimes think of an age as the big country house and the fancy dresses and the butlers and the vicars, but actually was a time of great social upheaval here. We had the great strike, the national strike. People were hungry. There were hunger marches, so people marching from the northeast of England, where I live now, down to London, protesting that they weren't getting enough to eat. So all that was happening, and yet people were reading about murders in vicarages and country houses because they needed that escape. And I think the same in the 70s and 80s, where it was a time of mines being closed, of national strikes, of, Margaret Thatcher bringing quite a lot of discord to the nation. But we had people like P.D. James and Ruth Rendell, who were huge crime writers of the time, writing really very traditional murder mysteries. And I think people read them for that sense of continuity and escape. And again, that sense of justice at the end and of better times to come and order being restored.
I read in one of your interviews that you're not a great fan of Agatha Christie. Can you tell us why?
I think she's very cold. She's very ruthless. She had serial killers in her books.
Yeah.
Long before anybody else did. And she killed schoolgirls without a qualm.
But then she has Miss Marple, who's such a warm character.
Yes, Miss Marple is, but still quite ruthless. She would quite happily send someone to the gallows. You know, she would see somebody hanged for committing murder. And I think I'm more interested in why people kill rather than, you know, the sort of puzzle of the whodunit, which she is brilliant at. She's very, very good at that. Yeah,
but that's true, that the center of her
solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, it interests me less than that kind of digging back into people's families and their personalities to try and work out why they might have committed murder.
And another one from the readers, is there a book that changed your life somehow?
Oh, goodness. There's a book there are books that I think if you want to write crime fiction, you should read because they're so well done. And those are the Maigret books by Georges Simenon. Don't know if you have them translated into Polish, because he writes with such clarity and with such skill. And in one sentence, he can tell you where you are, he can get you a sense of the place, he can describe the character, and he can move the plot on. He is just such a tight, concise, beautiful writer.
Yeah, he has many fans in Poland, I believe, though he hasn't been published for a while, probably.
I think Penguin here in the UK have just reissued all his Maigret books, and they've done very well with them. And I think there's a reason why that is, because he's such a fine writer.
And would you tell us what you're reading like these days? Do you read these classical crime writers, or I don't know, your reading plans for autumn?
What am I reading at the moment? What have I read? I read a literary novel a couple of weeks ago called Summer Water, which is just by a woman called Sarah Moss, which is just very interesting and it's one day of a group of people stuck in the rain in a miserable holiday complex, really, by the edge of a loch. And it's wonderful, and just, again, very well written. What else have I read? Pat Barker, who has written the Regeneration trilogy about the First World War, but has done one called The Silence of the Girls, which is taking the women's perspective of the Greek wars. And I loved that. Thought it was, again, just very, very good. But of course, I'm reading lots of crime fiction too.
Yeah. But I must say that I want to say that publicly, and I hope you would confirm that I haven't asked you to talk about Summer Water and Sarah Moss, because I'm a great fan and I'm a translator in Poland.
Oh, are you? Brilliant.
I'm sure that some readers would now feel manipulated. Oh, you must have asked Ann Cleeves to tell it.
No, not at all. I loved it. I read it a little while ago. I got it sent to me and just sat there and just, because she gets into the heads, doesn't she, so beautifully, of all those characters. And it must be quite tricky to translate because you have to find a voice for so many different characters.
Yeah, it's quite a challenge.
It would be quite a challenge.
Yeah. But when you were
that was one of my favorite books of the summer, that one.
Yeah, because when you were talking about your time as a cook at a bird watching station, actually, that reminded me of her other book, that's Night Waking, which is set.
I've not read that.
Oh, that's set on the island, and the main character is the wife of an ornithologist who goes there to study puffins, and they live just the two of them with their children on this desert island somewhere off the coast of Scotland.
All right, well, I'll have to look out for that.
You have to read it. That's definitely.
Yeah, I will.
And it does have a crime plot somewhere.
Yeah, there's a kind of there is a kind of crime in Summer Water, but or the potential for crime.
Yeah.
Quite an ambiguous ending.
Yeah.
We're not quite sure what exactly has happened there.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting and very clever.
Would you tell us, because I think that we may also reveal to the viewers that we're going to publish the new series that you're working on. That's The Long Call, and that's the one that's set in Devon, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. That's set in North Devon.
Would you tell our readers a few words about that, with no spoilers, obviously? But what can we expect?
The central character there is called Matthew Venn. And he grew up in a very small, tight, enclosed religious community, a quite rigid evangelical Christian community, where not at all cruel or horrible, but where the members were very, very sure, very certain of what they believed. And as many people do, when he hit his late teens, he lost his faith quite suddenly and quite dramatically and quite openly. And because of that, he was cast out by his family and by his community. And I think that's why he joined the police service, because that provided a community and a family and a sense of duty and a sense of honor and a sense of purpose, even of redemption, that he had when he was within, I've called them the brethren, the religious community. And so, that's who he is. And it doesn't help the reconciliation with his mother that he's gay. So he has a husband, and that makes it even harder for him to reconcile with his family. And so that's it. That's who he is. And I won't tell you anything about the story, because you'll have to read it when it comes out in Polish.
Was it very different to write a book that's set in the south of England instead the north of Scotland?
Yeah, a bit different, though it's still quite a marginal land. It's right on the edge, it's a land of salt marshes and estuaries. And although it's a holiday destination in the winter, it's not so much. And again, it's quite interesting, the idea of the human geography, looking at the different communities within that place. So it did have quite grand seaside towns, but they faded a bit. And the big hotels and guest houses for a while became hostels for homeless people, or places where asylum seekers would live, or people where people with addictions would go. And so it's a very mixed, so you get that, but then you get the very wealthy holidaymakers who come for the surfing and the beach holidays, and the local, a very arty community there as well. And so it's a mixture of all those things, really. And I like that idea of different people having to bump up against each other.
Is it interesting to have these kind of, I imagine it is interesting to have these new possibilities opening up with a completely new series. Does it?
Yes. Very much. I think this series is more of an ensemble piece. Mm-hmm. So I've just finished the first draft of the second book, and that's so I can look at not just the police team, but at Matthew's husband, Jonathan, and there's a young woman with Down syndrome, Lucy Braddock, who's in the first book, who also appears in the second book, has a walk-on part there. So and Matthew's mother also appears in both books. So it's a much wider series of returning characters, I think, which is quite fun to write.
Do your characters ever annoy you?
Sorry?
Do your characters ever annoy you?
Oh, yes, but they have to, don't they? Because we all have friends who annoy us. I've just as I say, I'm in the heads of these people that I've just been writing, and there's one of the characters is called Cynthia Pryor, and she's a magistrate, and she's very flamboyant, and she's quite wealthy, and she's very annoying at times, but quite amusing too, and a good friend, I think, in the end.
Is it more amusing to write about such characters, to get into their heads?
Yeah, it is, I suppose. And there's one young police officer who's called Ross, who's very patronizing to women. You know, not unusual, I think, for working class young men who don't live in London to be still quite old-fashioned in their views about what a woman should be doing and what their place should be, and that they should always look nice and they should be there to cook their dinner for them. And so it was kind of my editors, no, you can't have somebody like that, because they live in London and because they work in publishing, and so they don't meet so many men like that, but there are a lot of them around. So trying to persuade them that actually there are quite a lot of people like Ross out there in the real world, and you might come across them one day.
And is it so that, because from what you're saying is, seems to me that you're a very versatile person, that you're able to, you know, get the feelings and emotions of so many very different people. Do they always have some traits of your real personality in them, or never, or sometimes? How much of
they must
is in them?
I think there must be something of me in them, because I'm doing the writing, and it's my perspective on the world, I suppose. And my perspective is that there are some things that are important, like kindness. I think kindness is a very underrated quality. And so I think there will be a celebration of that compassion, kindness, warmth, perhaps, through all the books. And that's something that I wouldn't be able to write a sort of cold, ruthless Agatha Christie type novel, because that wouldn't be me, and I wouldn't enjoy doing it. So yeah, but it does take care to write about different kinds of people. So for instance, writing about Matthew and Jonathan, who are gay. I'm not gay, I'm a woman. I've obviously got gay friends, but I made sure I didn't want to appropriate feelings that weren't mine. And so I did have 3 different gay couples read the book before it went to publication, because I wanted to make sure that it felt right, that it felt authentic, and that I wasn't being offensive in any sense.
Thank you for saying that, because it's so important, and we tend to forget about that you just need to consult so many people in many ways.
I think so. Yeah, and for example, I always get a Shetlander to read the Shetland books before they're published, because again, it's easy to make assumptions about a place when you're not living there, even though you know it very well. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's assumptions of fact, or of, you know, just things, you know, things that you forget. Like most Shetland houses have 2 doors. They have a porch with 2 doors, because the wind is always so strong, and you'll choose which door to open according to the direction of the wind. And sometimes you just forget that nobody in Shetland carries an umbrella, for instance, because the wind is so strong that it would just... And I did have one scene where I had everybody holding umbrellas, and my Shetland friend, just think about this, Anne. When did you last see a Shetlander who owned an umbrella? People don't. So just little sort of details like that it's quite easy to get wrong. But then deeper things like, you know, again, in the long haul, there's a woman with Down syndrome, with a learning disability. And so obviously I wanted to speak to somebody with Down syndrome. So I spoke to this lovely lass called Izzy and Izzy's mum, and did chat to them for a bit, and also made sure it was read by somebody who'd worked with learning disabled adults for all their career too. So yeah, I'm much more concerned about that sort of research than police procedural and, you know, how you take fingerprints or that sort of thing.
You don't consult forensic specialists too often?
I do have 3 forensic friends who I do consult, but I don't worry too much if I get the details a bit wrong, because the story and the character is much more important to me than the procedure.
It seems that a lot of work that you put into writing is not writing, but checking, researching, consulting. Does it take long?
I try and write the story first, because I think if you do lots of research, you get weighed down with it and you come across all these interesting facts that you feel obliged to put into the book. Yeah. And I think we've all read books that are a bit like that, heavy with the weighty material, that are very interesting, but somehow throw the balance of the book out. So I'll do the story first and then I'll ask. Or sometimes I'll come across I've got this very good friend who's a forensic pathologist, and he's based in Aberdeen. So if there were a murder in Shetland, he would be the person to do the post-mortem. So he's great. I'm writing a scene which is got a lot of bones in it. I'll give him a ring. James, what would you be able to tell from a skeleton that, a pile of bones that have been lying there for ages and ages? What would you be able to tell? And he was able to tell me in great detail. You can tell gender, you can tell height, you could have a good stab at ethnicity, all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
What was the most surprising and outlandish issue that you had to consult with somebody that really surprised them?
I suppose in the new Matthew Venn that I'm just writing now, I have somebody killed with a very sharp shard of glass. So it's about a sort of artist's community. So it's a glass blower, and her work has been shattered. And so talking to James about, if you stabbed somebody with a piece of glass, would it break off? Would it be strong enough? Mm-hmm. And he was saying, well, we have quite a few brawls in pubs, and a number of people have been killed because somebody's smashed a pint glass, and then stuck it in somebody's neck. So you could kill somebody that way.
Oh, that's interesting. Scary.
Yeah, scary. But it is very easy to kill people.
Yeah, that's physically, and I always wondered mentally, because this is what your books are really most interesting to me about, that they show how many different shades there are in everything that's connected to crime, and how many different things lead to it.
I think in real life, most killers are young men, and I would guess, I've not seen the statistics, but I would guess that alcohol or drugs are involved in a lot of that. So it's that anger, it's that loss of control, it's that, and that isn't really very interesting for me to write about, because in a sense we can see where that comes from, and it's this is fiction. And there are people who write very, very good, very powerful novels about that sort of subject. Mm-hmm. But my books are quieter and more domestic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was actually, I think that would be the last question. And that's also a question from the reader. That very many writers, crime writers, tend to try psychological thrillers now. It seems to be the thing. Like, I don't know, maybe because of the popularity of Girl on the Train and similar books. Have you ever been tempted?
Not to write that sort of book. I mean, I would say that all good fiction is psychological, because we want to understand people, and we want to understand their relationships and what makes them who they are, but not in that sort of overt genre labeled way. No, I like writing the books that I like. I write the books that I would enjoy reading.
That's the perfect summary, I think. Okay, I think that's it. And thank you so much. That was really interesting talking to you. And I really hope we would be able to invite you in person one day. And
that would be lovely. I was looking forward to it. I had my flights all sorted and I was ready to come.
So let's hope that in a year or two, we'll have vaccinations and situation which would enable that. Yeah. Thank you so much, Anne, and have a very nice day.
And you. Thanks for a very, very interesting talk.
Thank you.